We still have people joining, so good morning, good afternoon for those who are just joining. I will comment the webinar in the next minute or so. Okay, with time limited to 1 hour, I'm going to make a start. So welcome everyone for this third webinar of AgriFood Connect. We've had a lot of interesting topics already in the last two sessions around pitching in particular and do's and don'ts around it. One of the key topics that we were asked really to consider for one of the webinar is on IP, and that's something that we're going to focus on today. I'm happy to say that we've got some experts in this particular space of IP in startups and for the larger organization as well. And just one thing to mention before we start with the presentations is to say that this presentation and webinar has been recorded and will become available afterwards, really, for all to share as well. So without further ado, a big thank you to all, and more importantly to our three speakers today. So we've got experts in IP, but we've got also an organization called Drummond Engineering, who is going to share the experience around IP in particular at the end of this program. But first, I'm happy to introduce Joe Doyle. Joe Doyle is an IP manager with Enterprise Ireland, and he manages the EI IP strategy support program within Enterprise Ireland. So obviously to help startups and SMEs to develop their strategies around IP. So Joe, please, the floor is yours, and if you want to share, you should be able to share your presentations. And welcome.
Great, thank you, Stefan, and good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, Stefan has already introduced me. I'm with Enterprise Ireland, so I hope everybody is familiar with what Enterprise Ireland does, and I'm the IP guy there. So I'm going to give a very, very quick crash course in intellectual property. So just to raise some awareness of general IP. Just see if my slides will share. Can you see my screen there? Okay, good. All right. So like I said, it's going to be a super fast crash course, just to give an introduction overview to IP, and I guess some of the reasons why Enterprise Ireland is supporting companies around IP, and how we are going about supporting companies. So I always like to set the context first. So we obviously work with a lot of companies in a lot of different sectors, and I just wanted to highlight that there's an important reason why we're supporting companies around IP. So, for example, here, this is just a summary of a couple of studies that have come out in recent years. On the left-hand side there, in terms of companies that are starting up, those that protect their IP from an early stage, in this case with patents and trademarks, well, it's not necessarily a causative relation, but there's a strong correlation between the ownership of IP and their ability to raise funding. So they're about 3.5 times more likely to raise seed funding, about 10 times more likely to raise early stage VC funding, and about 3 times more likely to achieve a successful exit. So the point there is that, you know, companies that do have this scalable potential, there is a very strong case to be made to protect their IP from an early stage. And then in terms of Enterprise Ireland's role in helping companies to scale and to grow and to develop economic benefit from that, while these companies that achieve this high growth sort of potential, they're relatively small in number. They deliver a disproportionately high contribution to the economy. They contribute about 25% of new jobs created during their high growth phases. So they're a very important cohort of companies, and they're what Enterprise Ireland we would call high potential startups. And they have these features you can see there, including owning intellectual property. So a very important cohort of companies. But in terms of how we are doing in terms of our innovativeness as an economy, I think there's some work to be done. And this is often a very hard thing to measure. So this scoreboard comes out every year, the European Innovation Scoreboard, and it's basically a ranking of EU member states against each other in terms of the innovativeness. So Ireland is doing well. We're in the strong innovator category, ranked 7th overall. But if you strip out the underlying dimensions of that ranking, consistently our worst performing dimension is intellectual assets, or otherwise known as intellectual property. So we're 22nd out of 27 in the members in the European Union in terms of our habitual protection of intellectual property. So I think that indicates that there is some work to be done there, particularly within the SME and startup community. So that's why I'm talking to you about IP. This slide, very busy slide, I'm not going to go through it. You're going to get the slides afterward, and there are links there if anybody wants to dig a little bit deeper. But down at the bottom there are some of the reasons that have been highlighted as barriers for companies to get involved with intellectual property. The two main ones are lack of IP and awareness within companies and the perceived high cost of IP protection. And so these are the reasons why in Enterprise Ireland we're supporting companies to become more IP active, and we're trying to address these challenges that companies face. So I get to the crash course on IP. What is IP? So IP relates to creations of the mind, original creations of the mind, and these can be embodied as features in new products and services. And so you have a different set of IP tools. So you can have technical features, you'll have a brand relating to your product. There's the design, the look and feel of products. There's the original expression of ideas, and there's know-how and that sort of knowledge that companies own. And for each of those, there's an IP tool for managing them. Patents, trademarks, registered designs are the kind of registered types of IP. And then you have unregistered types of IP, which is copyright and trade secrets. And these are the things that companies need to manage internally. So what this set of tools does for companies is it allows you to identify what those unique differentiating features that you've developed through research and development, innovation, whatever, your creative output. And there's an IP tool to help you to capture that and to own it as an asset of the company. So you're converting that intangible value that you create through innovation into intangible assets that you can leverage to scale the company. So applying that in the real world, I've taken a product that I hope we all recognize and look at, you can take any product and say, okay, what are the IP embodied in that product? So first of all, they have a number of registered designs. So if somebody threw a can of WD-40 at you with no labels on it, you'd know that it's WD-40 because it's a kind of a unique design. But it doesn't say anything about the function of it. Then there's also trademarks, which are the protection for companies around the brand. So WD-40 started out as water displacement at 40th attempt, not the snappiest brand that you could come up with, but it's become established over a very long time that WD-40 is now an extremely valuable asset that the company has, and that they protect it very carefully. Patents, the WD-40 organization don't have very many patents, to be honest with you, but this is an example of one that they do, where a kid in Canada sprayed themselves in the eye and they had to come up with a technical solution to that problem, which is what a patent is. So they found a patent on a child-resistant aerosol actuator. Hasn't hit the shelves here yet, but wait and see, it will soon. Copyright, everyone here has copyright. Copyright relates to the original expression of an idea. So two people can have the same idea and they can both express it in their own original way. So both have copyright. So copyright is ubiquitous. It relates to artistic sort of works, but also relates to things like software that a lot of companies are developing now, and an important automatic IP right that companies need to be aware of. Trade secrets. So WD-40 is a famous example of a trade secret where the formulation has been kept a secret since 1953. And it's not, and trade secrets are a very active, or it's a type of IP where the companies have to be very proactive in terms of how they manage it. So WD-40 have very sophisticated processes around ensuring that their formulation remains a secret, and that they've managed to maintain that for such a long time shows how robust their trade secret system is. So it's an important area for a lot of your sort of companies, food companies and so on, is to know what trade secrets are and what you need to do to protect them. And so then there's a kind of a second order level of protection, which is, it's not really protection, but it's how companies leverage all of that intangible value. It's called relational capital or network capital or that sort of thing. So where companies get involved in things like open innovation, like for example here, WD-40 got involved with some other companies to develop this new range of products and so on. So they used all of their brand, their know-how and so on to work with another company, combine their IP to create a whole new set of products. So so you have this whole range of different types of IPs. Some are registered via an external validation process, the patent office or whatever, and some are things that company must manage in-house. And in combination, the company uses those to develop their IP strategy. And so companies have different IP strategies. For WD-40, their brands and trade secrets are the core of their organization-wide IP strategy. So for other companies, for biotech company might be very heavily patent-centric and so on. So it varies depending on the company and the sector. And so that's a very physical product. You can apply the same thing to a company that's entirely intangible, like Airbnb, for example. And you might be surprised to hear that they have, you know, about 1,000 patent families. They have 300 or 400 registered trademarks last time I looked. A lot of registered designs, like a user interface. They've registered them as designs and so on. So there's a lot of that hard IP. And then in terms of the unregistered IP, obviously ubiquitous copyright content on their website and other places. They have a lot of valuable data. So you can just imagine the amount of data that a company like Airbnb gathers over time, and that data is really a core asset of the company. And that they would have very robust systems around maintaining secrecy and confidentiality around that database as an asset for the company. And then again, they leverage all of those assets to build their market, to build their community, and I suppose to scale the company. So just I suppose a message for you in your own business, you can kind of take this sort of snapshot. If you're wondering what's the IP in your own organization, it's an oversimplification maybe, but you can think about it in those sort of areas and say, what do we have or what could we have in these areas to build our IP strategy for our company? I'll just do a quick case study. A lot of companies here are food companies, and brands are really important in your area. So there's an example of an Irish beverage company. In this case, they registered a trademark back in 2015. And Mariah Carey came out with a product with the same brand in 2021. She wanted to register her trademark in the European Union, but came up against the Irish company's previously filed trademark. They attempted to revocate to cancel the Irish one, but they failed. And eventually the companies negotiated so that the Irish company transferred the trademark to the Mariah Carey organization, whatever they're called, and rebranded to Born Irish. So I like this example because it's a very relatable product. But the fact of the matter is that if this company hadn't decided to protect their IP at an early stage, long before they knew who was going to be competing with them, they would never have been able to survive an attack by a much larger organization from outside the country. So a good news story there. And he obviously decided to do a kind of a cheeky marketing campaign by putting this picture up on their website. So I like that too. Another case study, and relates again to the food industry, is a kind of, it relates to trademarks. It's a kind of a collective intellectual property right. You will see this, and when we like Parma ham or other things in other countries, but we forget that in Ireland we have a very unique food offering as well. And there are these European-wide protections that are a collective form of intellectual property. The leg of lamb there is a picture I stole from infringed the Dunstores copyright by taking that off their website. And this is a registration that can be obtained for example, Irish grass-fed beef recently got protected geographic indication at the European Union, I think last year. And this is an important way for companies, say in the food industry especially, but also in crafts, to connect the uniqueness and the innovation and the value of the product to the source of that product, i.e. the area that it comes from, and so on. So there's a list there of already registered geographic indications and designations of origin. And it's an important thing to maybe think about in the food industry as well, in leveraging that sort of value that's inherent in just being from the island of Ireland. Very quickly, I'll just run through what we do in Enterprise Ireland. So I work in the Research, Development and Innovation Department, and we do a lot of work with companies on R&D. So we support them to do an R&D project, build it into the IP strategy and growth plan of the company. So in recent years, we introduced complementary IP strategy grants to support companies to implement an IP strategy with a focus on their R&D and innovation, and to build that IP strategy into the innovation and growth plan of the company. The grants have two main objectives: to support access to the external IP expertise, people like Rosie, and to also to develop some internal IP awareness and capability within the company, so that the company can manage and document and just capture intellectual property as they create it over time. There are two grants. There's a smaller one, which is an IP Start, which is an 80% grant toward a spend of up to €6,300. And that's to help companies to undertake a discrete activity like an IP audit, register a trademark, draft a patent, something like that. And then the IP Plus grant is a 50% grant toward a spend of up to €70,000. And that supports external expertise as well as a portion of the cost of somebody internally to be the IP champion. So it's available to these companies, Irish HPSUs, high potential startups, and SMEs, and clients of one of the enterprise agencies. So I think that's all I have to say. There are a few links there, some useful information that there's a lot of information out there on IP and support and so on. So I just stuck a few in there that you can follow up on at some point. And I think that's all I have to say. A very quick whistle-stop tour of intellectual property. If anyone has any questions, if it's complicated questions, you can ask Rosie. She's the real expert.
Thank you very much, Joe. And Rosie will be straight after. But before I pass it on to Rosie for the next talk, do we have any burning questions, or we can put them at the end? Thank you, Joe, for a really interesting conversation. Bobby, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, thanks, Joe, for that. Yeah, early on in the presentation, Joe, you mentioned that cost has been one of the barriers for why companies don't follow the IP. Can you give maybe a best guesstimate of like what cost are we talking here? Does it depend on the complexity of the product, or what you're going after in terms of IP?
So yes, it does depend on the complexity of the product. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on how well prepared a company is in terms of, say, filing a patent application. So there really are a huge number of things to consider. But just as a very rough rule of thumb, what I would say to companies, there's there's a process. Obviously, you file your patent. If we're talking about patents, and I think Rosie's going to probably go into that in more detail. But as from my less informed point of view, I think for the first kind of 24 to 30 months of a patent application process, which is and that's following a very kind of common route to filing a patent with kind of global coverage. You'd want to be budgeting in around 20,000 for that period of time. And then after that, it gets expensive. So that's the initial phases of patent filing, application process, and preliminary examination and those sort of things.
I mean, it does get expensive after that point. And the reason why this lengthy time period is built into the patent process is for a reason. Like, it does allow you time to, once you've put your marker in the sand for your patent application, you do have 3 years to publicize your invention and to gather investment and test the waters and know how much you can then invest in a worldwide filing plan.
Yeah. The trademarks and registered designs are significantly cheaper than that and easier to obtain. And there are Europe-wide protections that companies can get in a single filing. There's a new development in patents called the unitary patent, which aims to reduce the cost of patenting in Europe. It's so you file one patent application and it applies across the majority of the European Union. Ireland has to have a referendum to participate in that. So I'm hoping you'll hear about that in due course, but we do actually have to have a public vote to allow us to participate in that unitary patenting.
Thank you very much, Joe. And probably at the end of it, if we've got a bit of time and without preempting Will's discussion with Padraig, it'd be interesting to also have the discussion on the reverse, which is not only the cost of protecting, but the cost of not protecting. I think it's also an important one, really, and Padraig will talk a bit about that later. So it'll be good, really, to weigh in really the cost versus yes, return on investment, but also the risk associated of not protecting. So without further ado, Rosie McDowell, thank you very much for joining. I'm sure you're a very busy lady. So you're a chartered UK and European patent attorney and specialize in agri-tech and pharmaceuticals. So no better person than you, Rosie, really, to try to give us a really crash course about different do's and don'ts around IP and getting us really to a level whereby at least we get a bit more understanding of it. So Rosie, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Stefan. Thanks as well, Joe. Yeah, so I spent 11 years working in two top-tier patent firms in the UK. And where I most encounter startups, I've worked with many startups in that time, but when we see them most often is when something has gone wrong. And at the point when they've realized that actually their patent portfolio is extremely important to them, and especially their early ideas. And I mean, this is just a perennial problem in patents, is that at the very early stages, when you have the opportunity to protect something early, you don't actually know how important that protection is. And as Joe covered, it's extremely expensive, even from the outset. So I'll share my screen. I've prepared a presentation which focuses on the main things that we encounter as patent attorneys that where problems have arisen in the early stages, and we're tasked to try and help with it. Because a lot of the time the problem is that when things go wrong right at the start, it actually is really difficult to fix and becomes very expensive to fix down the line. So hopefully this heads up will stop you from making these kinds of mistakes. Can everybody see my presentation okay? Cool. So by way of introduction, what is a patent, first of all? Patents are granted by governments, and they award you a monopoly right of your invention. And that right allows you to prevent another person from using your invention. It's not a right, it doesn't give you the right to actually use your invention if it, for example, infringes somebody else's rights. So you need to think of it as a blocking tool, essentially. It is awarded by specific governments. It's up to the government and the politics, the political climate, the national rules of that country, their legal system, what they will allow to be patented. And that means that, as Joe alluded to in his talk, it will be prosecuted in each country. It will be examined separately in each country with their rules. So that's why it can get quite expensive. But just to know that because it is a national right, you can't, for example, get one patent in the US and then think that that covers you in other territories. So if one of your competitors is based in a different country, then it may be that you want to have patent protection in that country as well if you're also planning to operate there. It's awarded in exchange for you publicizing details of your invention. So that is also something that you do need to be aware of, because what it allows, and the whole point of the patent system as a public benefit, is that you tell people how to work your invention, and then that allows other people, potentially your competitors as well, to then improve upon it and make their own inventions using what you've taught as a starting point. That doesn't mean that even if they improve upon your invention and then file for protection, it doesn't mean that they will be able to infringe your right. But you do need to be aware that you may be potentially giving other people a leg up by publishing details of your invention. And that lasts for 20 years from filing. 20 years may seem like a long time, but as Joe showed in his slides, a lot of, especially in the FMCG space, like where you build up lots of brand awareness over many, many years, your product may be on the market for much, much longer than 20 years. So you need to be conscious that whilst you're putting details into the public domain, it's not forever. It's only for 20 years where you get that protection. All the same, there are huge advantages to having a patent. And Joe went through many of these. It does, of course, attract investment. And for startups in any industry, that is the primary reason why they will be filing for patent protection as a tool to attract investors and attract investment. And the reason that it does that so well is any time, money, investment that you pour into your research and development, it means that your competitors can't come along and take the credit for that and the financial reward, which is owed to you. And your investors will want to know that as well, because they'll be wanting to recoup their investment eventually, of course. It also just shows that, just from a very basic perspective, it shows that you're really serious about your company and that you're willing to invest in your idea and you believe that you've got something really innovative, and demonstrates that it's really innovative. I mean, it's I've come round in my time as a patent attorney to appreciating the value of patents and patent protection as just a marketing tool in its own right. Like, it is good to have patent protection. It is good to be able to say nobody else can do what we do, and that is a valid reason for seeking patent protection. Obviously, nobody else can do what we do is not going to get you a patent, but it's a good reason to want patent protection. You can control who uses your invention via licensing, and maybe one day even generate revenue via licensing fees. If you're based in the UK, if you're incorporated in the UK, it can allow you to reduce your UK corporation tax bill from 23%, I think it is now. It's got pretty high recently, to 10%, which can represent a massive savings. And important to note that that's reduced to 10% on your profits worldwide coming into the UK. So it can represent a massive saving. And I could spend this entire talk and a lot more talking about patent box, and people are often very keen to hear about it. But if you do want to know any more, we can have a chat after or another time. Yes, something that I hear often, something that we hear often as patent attorneys is, I don't have the resources and I would never want to bring a case for infringement against one of my, I would never want to enforce my patent right against my competitors because it's too expensive. That may be so, but just the very fact that there is a patent in existence or a patent application in existence will deter competition. That is published after 18 months, that patent application, and it will come up in searches that your competitors do, freedom to operate searches. They may be like at a pre-R&D phase, they may be investigating an idea. They could see your patent right there, and that could, very well put them off investing any more time in the idea. And you would never know. But the fact that you have patent application there could be protecting you without, you even seeing a threat arise. Having patent protection then does allow you to collaborate more freely with partner organizations. And I'm thinking along the lines of big corporates who are very legally savvy and know how, I don't want to suggest that they'll be trying to trick you into stealing your intellectual property, but they might. So having patent protection at least gives you something to use as a bargaining chip, or to say that you have rights over this, and they need to respect those. So what makes an invention patentable? I'll talk a little bit more about this in the context of food and beverage inventions in this talk, because it occurred to me when I was preparing this, there are some tricksy things like, can you patent the flavor, and lots of questions that you could talk about for hours and argue over case law in, but I'll brush over them and try and explain why you can patent a lot of things in this area. But principally, in order to be awarded patent protection, an invention needs to be new, and it needs to be non-obvious or inventive and capable of industrial application. But primarily, it needs to solve a technical problem and provide a technical solution to a technical problem. And this is what examiners will be looking at. There's different criteria in every jurisdiction, but these are the main ones that are consistent across nearly all jurisdictions. Exclusions to patentability as well. Some territories will not allow you to have patent protection for basically things that are not technical, discoveries, scientific theories, mathematical methods, and so some types of software. So if your invention is an app, for example, then there is a bit of a question mark around that. And similar to you can't patent a flavor, that's not strictly true. You need to discuss this with a patent attorney, because there often will be some patentable subject matter buried in there somewhere. And especially with the case of a software app, I would highly recommend speaking to a patent attorney who's an expert in this area to probe whether your app, there might be protectable subject matter in there. So on to the mistakes, and as I alluded to in the previous slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's patentable in the food and beverage industry. So the question of you can't patent a flavor, you can't patent a recipe, that's kind of similar to an aesthetic creation. It's not it's correct in some ways, but if you have something in there in your invention which is still new and non-obvious and is capable of industrial application, and when I say that, I mean when writing this talk, I was looking for specific examples, and I came across so many I didn't even know which one to put in. But improved mouthfeel is a massive one that comes up all the time, especially in food products which are being prepared to eliminate dairy, for example, or to reduce fat. Additives that you add to them, and so you're preparing a specific recipe, and often the claims in these patent applications will have a list of ingredients with the amounts of each ingredient. So you basically do have recipes in the patent claims, but they'll always be examined with the same criteria. Is this new? Is this non-obvious? So I put some examples there of other things which might be patentable in the context of a food and beverage invention. So packaging, I'm thinking of coffee pods, for example, manufacturing machinery components. I don't know, something which doesn't clog up with an ingredient which is very gungy, for example. And like use of an ingredient which hasn't been used in that context previously, if it provides an improvement. Patents can also cover processes as well. So if you have a new manufacturing processes which increases efficiency, for example, that is likely to, well, if it's new and non-obvious and conforms to the other criteria, likely to be patentable as well. So always worth having a think about what you've created and like what the difference is between what you've seen previously, and speak to a patent attorney about whether they think that that might meet the patentability criteria. So the second mistake that I often have seen come into me when startups have got a little bit bigger, when they're maybe halfway through examination of their earlier patent applications, is maybe they've been a little bit lax with their confidentiality, and they've put too much information about their invention into the public domain before they filed a patent application. So as I mentioned at the start, examiners will be looking at whether an invention is new. Any information that's in the public domain prior to filing the patent application, even if it's come from you, will count as a disclosure. As patent attorneys, our inclination is to be extremely cautious with regard to disclosures before you file a patent application, and most of them will just shake their heads and tell you, oh, don't publish anything, don't give anything away. In reality, and coming from an in-house perspective, we should be recognizing the need to be pragmatic. So you will need to give some information out before you file a patent application, just to get the money to file a patent application. I mean, if you want investment, you're going to have to tell people about your invention to some extent. You may need to do market research. You may need to, see if it's of interest to people. And what I would say in these cases is, whilst that's like you may be able to give information away, you need to be really careful at what you're not doing is putting exactly how to work the invention out there. And what patent examiners will be looking for is, can an expert in this area, based on like what has been disclosed, can they perform the invention? So has there been enough information provided that they can work the invention? In the context of food inventions, for example, if you were to give away a free sample, like have you provided the ingredients list as well? I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So, I mean, the big one is just general publication, putting information in writing out there. That's really easy for an examiner to find just by doing web searches when they're doing when they're searching it for novelty. If you're an academic, publishing in an academic journal, one of the biggest problems as a patent attorney and with disclosure early on is like the pressure to publish if you're an academic. But if you're also planning on having a spin out or something, then that can be really problematic. Because one of the primary sources for patent examiners, and where they will find your invention is in the academic literature. But also blog posts, trade journals, anything. Public demonstration. Now, Stefan specifically asked me to mention this, and it is it's a really important one in this. So this is a very complicated area, what I will say. There is a lot of case law in it. Providing free samples to members of the public and having a public demonstration of your invention. So there's very well-known case law in the UK and it's like one of the foundational pieces of case law for novelty in the UK, is that if you have like if there was a new sailing boat and it was brought out onto the water, no members of the public saw it. It was totally private, but it was in a public area. And that was still considered to deprive claims directed to the sailing boat of novelty. So nobody even needs to see it. I mean, that's how strict this strict novelty can be. Having said that, what I spoke about previously is the disclosure enabling. So if you were to provide like taste samples for the public to taste, if it was just like, you know, bits of brownie and they tasted it, and that's fine. But you can't do that nowadays without providing a list of ingredients, because somebody could be really allergic to something in there. So you're still providing an ingredients list. And if you think about the person who needs to make this judgment about whether something is enabling or not is an expert. So they know everything. Just as a broad brushstroke, you could say that they know everything that you do and more. They also know everything that's been published about brownies. So would they be able to figure out what you've done if they've been given the ingredients list and they've tasted it? So yeah, you just need to be really careful about providing samples or demonstrating your invention to the public if it can be discerned how the invention works. Speak to a patent attorney, I would say, before making a decision on what to show. And then if your invention, for example, if your invention lies in the method of manufacturing and you're providing taste tests, then maybe that's not as big of a concern, because they're not going to be able to figure out like the bit of machinery that you use to produce this. So yeah, pragmatism and caution. Informal conversations with friends are also something that you do need to be cautious about. Again, not giving away everything about your invention to the point where they could perform it themselves, and also mention that it's confidential. If there's an air of confidentiality about it, better yet, get it in writing. The idea of you sitting down in the pub with you know, getting your friend to sign a form before you tell them about it's quite funny. Okay, I'm going to whiz through the next slides. This sounds like a cynical plump for patent attorneys, but really it's not. Filing an application that you've drafted yourself is something that we have to rectify all the time. And we understand that it is expensive at the outset and you don't know how valuable it's going to be. But as Joe mentioned, there is money available to you for that stage. Very easy to accidentally invalidate your patent if you don't get it right at the first stages, because the first application will form the basis for all future prosecution. And then the last one is to take care. Don't ignore your competitors' patents. They may not have a product on the market, but there may still be patents. There may still be patents or patent applications out there which cover what you want to do. And this is very common with massive multinational corporates like Kimberly-Clark have hundreds of thousands of patents for products that don't exist, but they'll still be monitoring people infringing them, just to, you know, keep people out of their market space and prevent products which compete with theirs. So do competitor intelligence before you put your life savings into developing a product. So early stage FTO, I'd always recommend it, and most investors will require it anyway as part of their due diligence. But you can at least use Google Patents for an early freedom to operate search. Try and find anything which is in the patent literature which looks like your invention. But better yet, to speak to a patent attorney for an early opinion. I will always recommend speaking to a patent attorney early. And I can say this because I'm currently unaffiliated for the next 2 months, but if I was a startup, I would make the most of these free consultations in the early stages. Like most patent attorneys will give you an hour of their time to chat through it. So have one question for each of them, I would say. Have a question about your application in mind when you go to speak to them. Speak to a few. One of them may really impress you and end up being your patent attorney for the foreseeable, but at least, speak to a range of people and get some questions answered. Retain confidentiality, investigate financial support, and make sure to monitor your competitors' patents as well. I'm not currently with a patent attorney firm for the next couple of months, but follow me on LinkedIn and please get in touch anyway. I'm happy to help if you've got any questions about anything. That's me.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Really insightful from someone involved with many of those breaches and issues. So a big thank you for that. Do we have any specific questions, burning questions for Rosie? I thought it was really an interesting one at the end. Is about really this let's use the maximum availability of the three Bs, really, as it were, to start with. Getting as much advice as possible is a good way of looking at it, because again, is almost a fear of not knowing is probably one of the things that is stopping startups to think very early on these discussions. It's also worth noting about, and I've been involved in this with my previous work, the importance of patenting for the opportunity that avails to you with tax relief in particular. It's so valuable for companies, small and big. Obviously, the bigger the better, because it's based on revenue moving forward. So it's really valuable in many ways. So do not underestimate the importance of getting this right for tax relief point of view. The big companies will all be very much on the top of the agenda for that. Any questions? I don't see any hands raised, so I will probably ask any question at the end of it, but thank you very much, Rosie, for this. And I'll pass on now to Podrick. Podrick Bosnan is the project manager for Beaumont Engineering and responsible for overseeing all the launching of new products into the markets and through a team of mechanical design engineers. So, and your background is in renewable energy and agricultural engineering in particular. So welcome, Podrick, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Stefan. Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Podrick Bosnan. I'm Engineering Projects Manager for the Construction Business Unit in Beaumont Engineering. So for anyone who doesn't know Beaumont, we're a family company founded in 1978 in Oldcastle, County Meath. We have approximately 100 employees, so not big by any means, but not small either. We primarily produce coupling components and attachments for the agriculture and construction machinery industry, exporting almost 90% of our products. And we primarily supply OEM customers. So you may recognize some of the logos there I have on the right-hand side of the slide. So just a quick overview of our products. On the construction side, our primary product is the construction quick coupler. For anyone who mightn't be familiar, a quick coupler is a tool that allows you to easily change between attachments on an excavator. So change between different buckets, different rock breakers, grabs, etc. So we have the quick coupler, we have a range of attachments to complement that, and we also have a tilting quick coupler, which allows for rotation from side to side of the quick coupler that leaves your machine just that little bit more versatile. On the ag side then, we have three primary products. We have a pickup hitch, ball and spoon system, and pallet forks. I suppose the pickup hitch is something that Beaumont is probably best known for. We supply probably 80% of the OEMs in terms of the tractor manufacturing. I suppose the challenges in an SME for filing IP or filing any sort of IP is that, first of all, it's nobody's dedicated job. We have 8 design engineers that would be producing, I suppose, designs that may be subject to IP. Each of those is very busy. They have multiple different tasks. The IP is only a subtask. of the MPI process for us. IP is also filed infrequently, so I suppose we may file IP in some form or another 3 times a year, or we may file it 3 times in a decade. So it's not something that's at the forefront of our minds all the time. And we also file IP on different elements such as logos, designs, systems, etc. So I suppose how it works in Dramone, if during the NPI process we identify something that may be worth protecting, we'll do an initial search for prior art that'll either be done by the product manager or a design engineer or myself. If we decide that that's worth protecting, then we'll go ahead and engage a patent attorney or an IP agency. They'll do a search for prior art and compile the application documents for us. Then we have probably a bit of an iterative process where they'll submit the documents to us, we'll review it. We have some product managers in our organization that are highly experienced at this stage at filing patents, so they know what we have been caught up with before and what we should include. So the document might go through maybe 4 iterations before it's filed, and then it goes through the standard procedure where the application is reviewed or audited, and then the decision is made to accept or reject it. So I suppose the importance of IP for Dramone, our 2 main products are the construction quick coupler and the tractor hitches. And to the untrained eye, most of them look the same. They're the same size, they're the same weight, they have similar designs. And the reason for that is primarily due to standards, and the other is due to the customer requirements. So the standards govern the safety for both coupling mechanisms. The customer requirements in both of our primary products is to have as low a profile and as light a weight as possible. So that envelope is already preset no matter what you're designing. So protecting the IP and design elements can give us a huge advantage then when we're designing, because there's only so many ways to comply with the standard. And also if you come up with a locking mechanism or a particular part of the design that allows your coupler to be 15-20 millimeters lower profile than the competitors, then you're already onto a winner. So it can give us a competitive advantage, I suppose, particularly when going for OEM contracts as opposed to just selling to the normal owner operator or the dealership. So the types of IP we use, gone through these already, but trademarks, patents, and registered designs. So on the trademarks, obviously logos, so our own Dramone logo, Intelligent Innovation, is trademarked, as well with a range of our various product logos, so nobody else can call their coupler the same thing. I suppose other industry trademarks in our industry, but not direct competitors. Both of these companies manufacture a component or a tool that's called a tilt rotator. So a tilt rotator is essentially, it's a quick coupler that can tilt from side to side and rotate continuously. And as you can see here, they have 2 very, very snappy names. Steel wrist, implying that the tilt rotator does all the functions that your own wrist can do. And rotor tilt, obviously the inverse of tilt rotator. So those 2 are very strong names in the industry. Other companies that have produced tilt rotators in more recent times have gone with names like Axis, which makes sense to an engineer because it's obviously an engineering term, but to the ordinary user, to the consumer of these products, it's not just as snappy as the 2 there on the left. In terms of registered design then, I suppose it can be difficult because most quick couplers are the same. There's a lot of prior art out there. It can be difficult to patent kind of a whole quick coupler itself. But this is our latest product. It's called the ML Smart. So it incorporates sensor technology to basically give live confirmation to bystanders and also to the operator of the machine that they're safely locked onto their attachment. It's a huge problem in the industry. many injuries and fatalities every year from buckets being dropped from quick couplers. So this is to kind of push things on a bit and challenge safety standards. So what we have done is we have protected the a round LED indicator in the side of the coupler, and we've also protected the sensor enclosure in the side of the hook. Going back to what I said earlier about most quick coupler designs being the same, because most designs are the same, and this is a very, I suppose this is a high precision component in an environment that isn't high precision. So for a competitor to be able to replicate what we've done there and not infringe on our registered design would be very difficult to achieve the same thing. So that's how we went about protecting this. We did look at a patent. It was seen as not being novel because there are many other similar systems out there in the same industry, but not in the same application. So we decided not to pursue that. What we have filed a patent on in more recent times is the product here, or the component here on the right. So the technical challenge that we were coming up against here was the assembly on the left. As you move down through the ranges and as you get into trying to fit something on a mini digger, obviously every millimeter that you can reduce the vertical height by is important. But to get all of those components in that assembly into a coupler for a 2-ton machine was going to be proven very difficult. The vertical height would look disproportionate to the size of the machine. So what we decided to do was come up with a system that incorporated all of that into one. So your primary engagement system, your secondary safety lock, your actuation, and your those three things all combined into one. So that patent has been filed since last September, I think. So I think we're still waiting on a decision on that. I suppose just to finish up with 2 case studies. First one on the limitations of IP. So the coupler here in the center, this red coupler, is called a Wainwright XLS coupler system. And what this is a very basic mechanical system. It's hugely popular in the US with plant hire companies. There's tens of thousands of units produced every year. But Wainwright protected this design going back a good few years ago at this stage, and in more recent years that protection has ran out. And what happened in the meantime is that Wainwright didn't grow themselves enough, or they didn't establish their place in the market well enough. So it meant they were still just producing these couplers, producing nothing else. They had no OEM contracts. They were just producing for themselves. So the minute that patent ran out, you had all of these other companies took on the product: Strickland, TAG, C&P, Paladin, who were owned by Stanley Black & Decker, so a massive organization. And then Caterpillar, at an OEM level, decided to just produce that and offer it on their own machines. So I suppose the lesson here was that Wainwright didn't establish themselves well enough, and once the protection ran out, it just opened the market up. I suppose the 3 companies here on the left, Paladin, Caterpillar, and ourselves, we have an advantage over Wainwright because we're already integrated with OEMs and already approved suppliers, which many OEMs would be reluctant to take on new approved suppliers if there wasn't a good reason for it. So then just finally, I suppose an example of where we got it wrong. Back in the early 90s, we invented the hydraulic pushback hitch. Some of you may be familiar with that, some of you may not, but it is the yellow square section at the bottom of my screen here that I'm outlining. So what that does is that pushes the hitch out the back of the tractor, and what you can do is you can see the tow hook engaging with the trailer. Previously, you wouldn't be able to see that. So we did file a patent on the hitch, but the patent was weak in its claim, and we did overlook the fact that the hydraulic pushback itself was novel. Again, we focus more on protecting the safety mechanism here, the latching mechanism, where most of the efforts were focused on battling with our competitors. Within 2 years, 2 of our main competitors released essentially the same design. It's pretty basic design, so it's easy to get right. But they released the same design to the market, and if we protected the design back then, we probably would have had the monopoly on all OEM supply of pushback hitches from 1995 to 2005. And I suppose probably the biggest kick in the teeth is that we still compete with these companies today. These companies supply John Deere, Case, and New Holland, which are probably three of the biggest OEMs, and is a significant market share that we're missing out on. So definitely a lesson that we took from that in looking at products, you know, looking at elements of products that we could patent in the future. So I know I rushed through that, but that's everything. Anyone have any questions or comments?
Thank you very much, Padraig. Really interesting, and especially the last case study about really the risk of not protecting in particular, and we're talking about tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds or euros opportunity.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time. It's an apology for the it's 3 minutes past 1. So there's one question that came from one, which is an important one, and I think it was slightly mentioned by Rosie in particular and Joe, but it's probably for you, Rosie and Joe, is about to address the issues pertaining to the protection of software in particular. How do those companies, and you mentioned about the app in particular, how can they help themselves in relation to protecting IP in this space?
Yeah, the issue with software is it's determining what's technical about it. So two key questions are whether something is a piece of software is patentable, or firstly, is it improving the computer in some way? So that can be evidence of a technical effect. For example, does the software improve the memory allocation or improve the processing power of the computer? And the second question could be, is the software improving a technical process? So is the software running a device like a 3D printer, for example, and does it improve its the way it works in some way? Or another example would be, like, does it manipulate a braking system to test if you need to brake differently if the ground is wet? Those kinds of feedback mechanisms. What's less likely to be patentable is if the software is merely like performing a calculation that like if it's taking the place of a human being. So if you put data into it and then it gives you an answer out again, that is much less likely to be considered patentable. One I came across quite recently in the food and beverage industry actually was like an app which takes pictures of bread structure and tells you what like the mouthfeel characteristics of that bread might be without having to be tasted. So it then gives you like a quality assessment, and that's the kind of thing that could be quite tricky to patent, because basically you're just replacing what a human would do in that context. Does that make it any clearer? What I would recommend, Ruan, it was your question, is if you do have a software invention, please do use the free hour that like nearly all patent attorneys will give you. Bring them up, send someone an email and say, I saw your profile, I see that this is your area of expertise. Can we have an hour chat about my invention? And they will be champing at the bit. They love talking to potential clients, and doesn't mean that you've got to go ahead with them at all, but you could have an hour of talking to somebody about your invention and getting their feedback on whether they think it's inventive or not. And no patent attorney is going to convince you to push something through which they think isn't inventive. It's not in their interests.
Thank you, Rosie. And we're running out of time in here. Joe put a link as well in terms of intellectual property rights for mobile applications that could be also useful. So a big thank you to Rosie, Joe, and Padraig for their presentations. And apology, we run a bit over time. And Bobby and I, we don't have the time, but Bobby and I will send further informations to all for the next workshop that we're running in Belfast in June. So we'll provide some more information about it. So a big thank you to all, and talk very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.